Welcome to the second semester FYUGP students. We are dealing with the paper English Core, paper 2. And the title of the paper, of course, we know from our previous discussions, is Forms, Genres, and Concepts of English Literature. And the genre we are taking up today is there in front of you in the slide, crime fiction. So we have been doing fiction, the novel and the short story picaresque novel. Another category of fiction, that is crime fiction. So this presentation will bring to the fore this particular subgenre of fiction called crime fiction. So let's move to the slides. Now, as the title suggests, or rather it explicitly tells us, it is a fictional narrative. Fiction, we know fiction is something that is invented. It's not an account of something that actually happened. Names and dates and places are not the real ones, but they're invented, concocted. Now it's a narrative. It's fictional narrative. It means it's a telling. It's not a drama. It's not an enactment. It's not a poem. Also, it's a telling. I mean, it's not a lyric poem. It's a telling. It's narrative prose. So fictional narrative in prose, where a crime is committed. So the important thing in crime fiction is at the center of it, there has to be a crime. The whole story hinges on a crime being committed. And crime, you know, crimes or offenses or acts that go against the law. It could be murder, rape, theft, robbery, burglary, abduction, all sorts of crimes. So these are the stuff of that particular category of fiction called crime fiction. Now, crimes can be there in all kinds of fiction, but the fiction where the crime is at the center of the plot, the most important incident, that kind of a fiction is called crime fiction, which is at the foundation of the story or the narrative. So the next slide. Now, crime fiction, of course, crime fiction begins. Fiction itself technically starts, we know, in the 18th century. In the 18th century, we had the growth of the English novel. And in the 19th century, we know we had the development of the short story. In the 18th century, also developed what is called Gothic fiction. Now, Gothic, of course, means medieval. Gothic comes from the medieval tribe Goth, the Goths. Gothic fiction is a kind of horror fiction where crimes are committed, where there's supernatural elements as well. That was the starting point of crime fiction, the Gothic fiction. But as we always say, there's always a tradition. Nothing comes out of nothing suddenly. Now, crimes have been there even in biblical stories. Examples are given by scholars, like the story of Susanna and her elders. That and other biblical stories have crime at the center. The mythological stories of, say, Hercules and Cacus are crime stories, crime narratives. There's even tampering of evidence, etc., in these stories. Then Herodotus' story of King Rhampsinitus, that's a crime story. So crimes are the stuff of stories. Crime stories are popular. People like reading crime stories. So they have been there from time immemorial, actually. But the modern concept of crime fiction starts, we can say, in the 18th century. Just like the novel, technically the short story, for example, starts in the 19th century, but stories were there even earlier. So the modern concept of the crime fiction, answering to the technical needs of the modern genre, starts in, we can say, in the 18th century. Now, crime fiction again can be classified into several subgenres. The first one, of course, is the detective stories or mystery fiction. Now, detective stories you are familiar with, I'm sure you're familiar with at least Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes and Watson. Very popular. Those are detectives. Sherlock Holmes is a detective. Or Edgar Allan Poe, of course, is the father of the detective fiction. He's Auguste Dupin. He is the literary detective. So detective stories, what are those? You can see on the slide there, a type of fiction centered around the investigation of a crime. So here the investigation is important. That kind of a crime fiction is called, that investigation is done either by a private detective or a policeman, and where there's a mystery. A mystery on the surface, it looks insoluble. That kind of a story is called like detective fiction. So around a mystery that appears insoluble through normal investigative methods. For this reason, it is also known as mystery fiction. Detective fiction, by focusing on the investigation, it also focuses on the detection as well as the detective who follows a particular method. So that is one of the kinds of crime fiction, detective fiction, very popular. Then detective fiction itself has again different kinds. They are, first of all, whodunits. It's a self-explanatory. Whodunit is a very brief or what is that, clipped form of who has done it. So detective fiction, where the focus is on who has committed the crime and which is withheld till the very end. That kind of a detective story is called a whodunit. And then police procedurals, of course, there the detective is a policeman and he follows the police manual, a copybook style investigation, being on the right side of the law. That kind of detective stories are called police procedurals. Then children's detectives, of course, where detective fiction, where you have a group of children acting as detectives, uncovering crimes, famous wives, Enid Blyton, for example. Such kind of works are called children's detective fiction. And country house mysteries. Country house, a crime is committed in a country house, and the suspects are limited to a small group of guests. That kind of a story is called a country house mysteries, or mystery or mysteries. And cozy mysteries. Cozy means ultimately it ends not on a very gory and violent note. The violence is reduced. All is well at the end. That kind of a story is called a cozy mystery, though there is mystery there. And armchair detective fiction, of course, armchair detective fiction, armchair detective fiction is where a crime is investigated and solved with the detective actually not moving out of his home. He solves the case sitting in his chamber without even visiting the site of crime. That kind of a story is called armchair detective. Of course, that also is an interesting genre. And that one kind of armchair detective fiction is, of course, the tales of ratiocination developed by Edgar Allan Poe again in America, where the crime is solved by logical reasoning, by the detective actually thinking like the one who is suspected to be the criminal. So that kind of a story where there is very little adventure, outdoor violence, etc. That kind of a story is called a tale of ratiocination. Then, of course, there is the serial killer thriller. Very sensational, of course. You know what a serial killer thriller is. It's thrilling, no doubt, where a series of murders are committed and which have a pattern. And the pattern is to be unearthed, and the criminal has to be apprehended. That kind of a detective story is called a serial killer thriller. So these are the different kinds of detective stories: whodunits, police procedurals, children detective fiction, country house mysteries, cozy mysteries, armchair detective fiction, tales of ratiocination, serial killer thriller. Now, most of these are self-explanatory. You don't have to go. You don't have to look up glossaries and books. From the titles themselves, you know what they are, except a couple of them. Now, so the first kind of crime fiction is the detective fiction. Under detective fiction, we have these kinds of detective stories. Now, moving on to the other kinds of crime fiction. So number one was detective or mysteries. Second, locked room mystery, again, self-explanatory. In a sealed room, or at least apparently sealed, the crime is committed. Now, how that happens and how has the criminal got into it and escaped? That is the story of a locked room mystery. Then forensic fiction, use of science, scientific investigation for solving crimes, DNA samples, blood samples, etc. are used, fingerprints, etc. are used in this kind of crime fiction to unearth crimes. Such stories are called forensic fiction. Then espionage fiction, espionage, spying. So where the central character is a spy. either appointed by the government or the state or some companies or even individuals. And hard-boiled fiction is an American genre, of course, where it has violence and action, and the concentration is on the detective himself. That kind of a story is called hard-boiled fiction. And historical crime fiction, something that happened in the past, a crime committed in the past, and sometimes this crime committed in the past, of course, is solved by a detective from the present times. So those are called historical crime fictions. And then Gothic fiction, of course, I have already mentioned, which developed in the 18th century. That in that pre-romantic and romantic period, going back to the Middle Ages, fascination for the Middle Ages, supernaturalism, horror, where cunning passages, castles are there, crimes like abduction, rape, etc. happen. That kind of fiction is called Gothic fiction. So those are the various types of crime fiction, starting with detective fiction, which we dealt with in detail in the earlier slide, along with the various kinds of detective fiction. Then now we have, after detective fiction, we have the locked-room mystery, forensic fiction, espionage fiction, hard-boiled fiction, historical crime fiction, Gothic fiction. So these are the main types of crime fiction available in the genre. Now, to conclude our presentation today, now we often hear the term the golden age of crime fiction. In British or English literature, the golden age of crime fiction is considered to be the period between World War I and World War II. So 1920 to 1940, you can say that those decades are the golden ages when we had those crime fiction by Agatha Christie and others. Now, one important point we need to mention here before we wind up is that revenge tragedies, Seneca revenge tragedies, which are very popular during the Elizabethan periods, University Weeds, Shakespeare, Webster, etc. Relished this genre. They wrote a number of great revenge tragedies. Hamlet itself is a revenge tragedy, or Webster's The Death of Malfi. Now, revenge tragedies, of course, does not come under fiction technically. Fiction is about fiction is different, prose tellings. But those plays, they are plays, another genre. Still, the revenge tragedies are considered to be a source of influence in the development of the kind of crime fiction we are talking about. So that is it. That was a short, swift sweep of the crime fiction genre. So I hope this will help you in dealing with this kind of a genre, if at all questions are set in the exam. It's there in your syllabus, an important genre, of course, subgenre of fiction. So best of luck. This will be, you can say this is a broad perspective of the genre. You can go deeper into it. We can have our offline classes also on the same topic at a later date. But let this be the starting point. So thank you. Good luck.